Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Finca El Dorado wash processed Ecuador from Rising Coffee. And there's the bag right there. And Rising, based out of New York City, New York. And this is their third ever appearance on this channel, having recently reviewed the Finca Eliza, a different Ecuadorian Cup of Excellence coffee. And in that review, I mentioned that we did pick up all three of the Ecuadorian Cup of Excellence coffees from Rising, with the Finca Eliza being the 10th place finisher and this coffee finishing in 8th place. So it'll be interesting to see how these two coffees compare, as this right here is day 31. And recipe was for this coffee was a toned down one at a 15:1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 93 degrees Celsius, about 199 degrees Fahrenheit. And I like this one best through the V60, which does indicate a more medium fine grind. Roast profile for this coffee. All three of the coffees that we are reviewing from Rising are going to be at a pretty similar level, and in our previous Rising review, we said that they do still skew a little bit on the lighter side of things relative to the majority of American-based coffee roasters out there, though definitely not on the overly light side of things. As in that review, we compared them to Heart, and I can say that that's definitely the case for this coffee as well. So for that reason, we can align them with being on the more light medium light side of things by most standards and metrics. With all that out of the way, let's go and start discussing this coffee. Day 14, first impression, and we did opt for the V60, and the coffee was off to an okay start, as it was a little bit cleaner than the Finca Eliza, but also offered a little bit more of the classic gesha-like feel with still plenty of intensity to it. Outside of that, there is a lighter colored profile to it, with the focus being on the citric and stone fruit components, but also plenty of intense floral qualities in a more honeysuckle-like sense. So a little bit more classic gesha in that regard. And when I looked at the information for this coffee, it doesn't sound like it is also a true traditional wash processed coffee. It sounds like there's a little bit of additional fermentation to it, but it's definitely less processed than the Finca Eliza from what I can tell. So for that reason, it made a lot more sense why this coffee did come out a little bit cleaner, but even then, not necessarily to the extent and standard that you might have for a washed Ecuadorian gesha. Day 17 through the Chemex, and it did improve relative to the first impression, as there is a pretty prominent brightness in a stone fruit-like sense, as it does offer plenty of intensity, but still a little bit of fermentiness, making for it not necessarily being the cleanest experience, especially for being a wash-processed gesha. So in the same way with the Finca Eliza, I did look up the information for this coffee around this time to try to get an idea of what this coffee was actually supposed to be in regards to processing. And again, I do believe that they said that it was like a double fermentation wash. So there's just a slight bit more processing than normal from what it sounds like, which explains a lot. It also explains why it translated in this sense. Pretty prominently lighter colored florality once again, leading to a pretty solid second impression as well. Day 20 through the UFO Brewer, and there are some similarities to the earlier days, as it does have a little bit of that fermentiness to it, giving it a slight red fruit lychee-like quality. You know what was kind of fun was trying to navigate all three of these coffees, given that I brewed each one of them back to back to back every time we worked through these coffees. So trying to make sure that I didn't overlap in terms of either the notes or what I remembered from each coffee was kind of interesting, but there definitely was plenty of tropicality in a stone fruit-like sense, with a little bit more of a mango feel, but also a more perfumey, heavy, but lighter colored florality as well. This time around, I can highlight that there's a fair bit of a butterscotch-like feel, giving it a very strong candied component to it, which is something that I was contemplating when we were going through the Finca Eliza review. I just wanted to make sure I had my notes straight and remembered which one of these coffees had that pretty prominent butterscotch-like feel, as the other one had a little bit more of that vanilla-like sugariness. Day 23 through the V60 with some lower extraction adjustments, so 15:1 at 93 degrees Celsius. And this was one of the cleaner experiences we had, as it was still very tropical fruit forward with a strong nectar to it in primarily a mango and artificial peach-like sense. However, it did still offer a little bit more of a cleaner, more traditional feel outside of that. Less of the butterscotch qualities, though still plenty of the fruit characteristics, so that in turn was one of the better days we had experienced. Day 25 through the Chemex with the same adjustments, and the coffee is better again today, indicating that this coffee just generally benefits from lower extraction adjustments, which didn't necessarily seem to be the case with the Finca Eliza. So that's why, again, I felt like we got a pretty good read on all of these coffees. This just seemed to work a little bit better, as it is still very stone fruit forward off brew, but it is coupled by a lighter florality once again, including a more intense jasmine characteristic as opposed to the subtlety that you would expect for a gesha coffee. a lot of white peach as well, as the coffee is presenting in just an overall cleaner experience when we kept the extraction a little bit lower. Day 27 through the Chemex with the same recipe, and the coffee is close to being at its best again, as we did have pretty good results brewing this coffee with this brew method, as it's much more gesha-like, so it does offer a little bit more delicacy, a little bit more tame and clear of a profile in comparison to the other coffees that we were working on at this time. Still a relatively high level of intensity nonetheless, as there's a little bit of delicacy off brew before it kind of transitions into a combination of citric and stone fruit qualities, ranging from an abundance of characteristics. I pulled out characteristics like lime, as well as some slightly more tart apples, and then in addition to that, a sugary, lighter colored stone fruit in both a peach and nectarine sense. So I'm primarily thinking of like a white peach, a white nectarine, with plenty of the listed honey qualities once again, as well as a subtle jasmine characteristic with the lingering butterscotch in the finish as well. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And I'm not sure if you guys can hear the sirens in the background. They're a little bit faint, but given that it's raining a little hard, there have been cops going around all night. So let's go through this tasting wheel. We'll go ahead and start with the cleanliness level 4. In comparison to the Finca Lisa, I did find this one to be a little bit cleaner, though both had pretty nice definition. I also mentioned in that review that I didn't think any of the coffees that we were working on from Rising, the 3 Ecuadorian geshas, did have potential to score level 5. First impression kind of took that away from all 3 of them, largely because of the intensity that all 3 of them offered. So level 4 is where we opted to put it, but plenty of cleanliness outside of the ever so slight fermentation we got at times. Finish level 4, and I can say that this coffee might have had the best finish of the 3, largely because it had the most well-defined brown candy-like quality to it, the butterscotch-like feel. And what I really wanted to highlight in comparison to the Finca Lisa and this Finca El Dorado is that this coffee and that one both had a very strong candied sugariness to them, both presenting in a slightly different sense. I do believe it is the roasting machine that they were actually using. I do think that that added a little bit of depth, as I can imagine that this same coffee roasted on a Loring or a Stronghold probably doesn't offer this same strong sugary sweetness that this one did, which is of course roasted on a Diedrich. So for that reason, don't quote me on that, I believe it's roasted on Diedrich, but regardless, I do believe that that played a pretty significant role in that aspect of this coffee. Sweetness, level 4, that's the additional part of that. That butterscotch-like sweetness just gave it that additional depth, but outside of that, in the same way that the Finca Lisa had plenty of sugariness to it, or sweetness in the fruit sense, this one also had plenty of sweetness in the fruit sense, as there's a lot more of the sugary stone fruit qualities to this one. So again, we got a fair bit of mango-like tropicality, as well as the peach and nectarine characteristics as well. So that was a very important part of the sweetness being there at the level 4. Florality level 4. The florality in all 3 of the coffees did seem to present pretty similar. This one a little bit, I would say, more of a jasmine as opposed to just a one note sort of honeysuckle characteristic that was more prominent in the Finca Lisa coffee. So level 4 is still where we opted to put it, though both of them still had plenty of that honey-like quality to them. Citrus fruit, level 4. I briefly mentioned there are some slightly tart apples, so I can see a green apple quality characteristic to this one, which would fall into that citric category, as well as the lime, because I also got a little bit of a green tint to this coffee, so I can see maybe a little bit of a green tea characteristic, but there is enough green to put the citrus fruit there at that level 4 mark. Stone fruit, level 4. You got all 3 of the major stone fruits within this one, so the peach, nectarine, and mango, although the peach and nectarine are both in that slightly more sugary, I want to say lighter colored white peach nectarine sense, while the mango just had a little bit more of that nectar-like feel to it. So plenty of depth in these stone fruits. Level 4 seemed perfect for that. And then a couple of level 3s. We will start with the acidity level 3. Same thing, not the brightest coffee, though this one was closer to a true level 3 as opposed to that Finca Lisa. So for acidity lovers, that might be a preferred coffee for you, though I didn't mind this one being a little bit lower. And then the caramel level 3, as this one had much more of that butterscotch-like feel. If there's one coffee of the 3 of these Rising Cup of Excellence coffees that did deserve a level 3, it's definitely this one. It's probably on the higher side of the level 3, but pretty prominent even when we kept the extraction a little bit lower to this coffee. And then the final thing worth discussing, body level 2. So this is much more in line with the expectations, even with it being an Ecuadorian coffee. The Finca Eliza being an anaerobic wash-processed Ecuadorian coffee probably contributed to having a little bit more of a creamy body. This one a little bit lower in that sense, a little bit silkier as opposed to just intense in that regard. So yeah, as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it is a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. It's interesting to me. I do believe, don't quote me on this either, that at one point Jesse told me that this was his least favorite of the 3 Ecuadorian Cup of Excellence coffees, but for me, I do believe it was probably my favorite, largely because it presented the cleanest of the 3. And now in the Finca Eliza review, we already mentioned that there was a little bit of that fermenty red berry quality at time. And when we get to the final review, the La Noria, you'll kind of see the issues that we had with that coffee. But this one right here presented the most traditional of the gesha characteristics. And for that reason, it probably was my favorite. Couple that with the fact that it had much more of the stone fruit characteristics, which is my preference to it. It did hit, I would say, moderately high on the big 4 things I'm looking for. Cleanliness seemed to be the cleanest. Sweetness definitely had a lot of sweetness to it. Florality, and then the fruit characteristics. So I had nothing but positive things to say about this one. Definitely my favorite of the 4. And I would say just kind of interesting based off of the 3 Ecuadorian geshas that we are reviewing from them, because I saw so many similarities to the Finca Eliza and the La Noria when we get to it. So yeah, we'll kind of get to that in the final part of this. Type of person I would suggest this coffee to. This one does skew a little bit more on the traditional side of things, as it's not going to be the brightest, it's not going to be the heaviest bodied, and it's going to offer just a slight bit more delicacy, though still plenty of intensity for what this coffee is. So primary focus being largely on the stone fruit characteristics and that very unique butterscotch-like feel, so that does give it a little bit of additional depth to complement some citric qualities and aspects to this coffee as well. So that's kind of the best direction I can point somebody towards on this one, and also the best way I can leave this review. If you by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Finca El Dorado, wash processed Ecuador from Rising Coffee. Thanks for watching.